The US tried to choke China's chip industry, but instead, Chinese chipmakers just reported 385% profit growth. And here's the kicker, Nvidia's China revenue has dropped to exactly zero. Meanwhile, Huawei is taking over. So who's really losing the chip war? Let me break it down, because the answer might surprise you. And I track the semiconductor industry daily so you don't have to. Here's what we'll cover in this 10-minute breakdown. First, the numbers, US chipmakers' losses versus China's gains. Second, the irony, export controls backfiring. Third, the bigger loss, customer relationships and market knowledge. Fourth, long-term structural damage. And finally, my honest take, who wins and who loses. So let's start with the numbers. Before US export restrictions escalated, Nvidia controlled roughly 95% of China's advanced AI chip market. China accounted for at least one-fifth of Nvidia's data center revenue, about $50 billion annually. Today, Nvidia's China revenue stands at zero. CFO Colette Kress confirmed the company no longer includes China in baseline forecasts. And Nvidia isn't alone. AMD and Intel have also lost significant access. But here's the irony, while US chipmakers are losing billions, China's domestic chip companies are posting record profits. SMIC, China's largest foundry, saw net profit jump 261.7% year-over-year to $479 million. Hua Hong saw a profit surge of 385.9% to $38.6 million. Why? Because there's a massive spike in demand for domestic AI chips free of US export controls. The restrictions meant to slow China down are actually accelerating their self-sufficiency. Now here's what Forbes and other analysts are saying is the real loss, not sales, but relationships. Best salespeople are listeners. When you can't sell to Chinese customers, you lose deep customer relationships because you can't consult with them anymore. You lose evolving market knowledge because you don't know how products are used or what's needed next. And you lose brand elevation. The American genius inside global brand value is disappearing. Nvidia's Jensen Huang made a fascinating point about this. He wants to make sure that all the AI developers in the world are developing on the American tech stack. It would be extremely foolish to create two ecosystems. Every Chinese developer who switches to Huawei's Ascend platform weakens Nvidia's CUDA ecosystem globally, not just in China. There's another problem, perception. US chipmakers are now seen as unreliable suppliers. Political uncertainty is attached to their products. Chinese companies can't depend on them for long-term planning. US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick recently admitted that they have not sold them chips as of yet. This perception issue is structural. It won't go away even if restrictions are lifted tomorrow. And here's the real kicker, competition is accelerating faster than anyone expected. Hundell Jones, a semiconductor consultant at International Business Strategies, said that for the semiconductor industry in the US, China is gone. His prediction, by 2030, Chinese companies will lead in every major category of AI chip production in China. US companies fear that Huawei will take the leading position in the Chinese AI chip market due to the lack of US competition. And if Huawei gains momentum, China will use their chips to build AI data centers worldwide, part of their Belt and Road Initiative. Now here's what Wall Street isn't telling you, because they need you to keep believing in the American dominance narrative. Let me give you the honest long-term outlook. ARM Holdings CEO Rene Haas said that AI-capable CPU exports to China would be nearly impossible to block because CPUs are widespread and hard to distinguish by purpose. He warned that US export controls could slow overall technological progress and ultimately hurt consumers and businesses. Chinese expert Chen Jing from the Technology and Strategy Research Institute said politically driven restrictions create unnecessary regulatory burdens for the industry and could backfire by weakening US firms' own innovation capacity and raising compliance costs. And here's the structural problem: the innovation feedback loop is broken. Sales and relationships give critical insights for future research and development. Without that feedback, US firms lose their edge. One LSE analysis put it perfectly: the 2030s will not be won by whichever bloc has the longest entity list. They will be won by whichever one trains the most engineers, builds the most resilient supply chains, and runs the most productive university-industry partnerships. Export controls slow adversaries on the margin, but they don't produce a single additional fabrication plant, engineer, or research program. So my honest take: short-term sales losses are visible. But long-term, this is a structural disadvantage for the US chip sector. The people saying these restrictions are working aren't looking far enough ahead. Let's quickly recap what we covered. First, US chip makers lost China revenue, Nvidia at zero, others severely restricted. Second, Chinese chip makers SMIC and Hua Hong saw 261% and 385% profit growth. Third, the bigger loss is customer relationships, market knowledge, and brand value. Fourth, US chip makers are now seen as unreliable suppliers, a permanent perception shift. Fifth, long-term risk is US losing the innovation feedback loop and ecosystem leadership. If you want to understand how to invest in this shifting landscape, watch this next video, link to related. Like, subscribe, and comment your take. Are US export controls working or backfiring? I'll see you in the next one.